Welcome to Lord Nightmare channel. We share scary stories with rainy ambience. I hope this video helps you in some way to sleep, relax, or just be entertained for a while. If you enjoy it, please think about subscribing and hitting the thumbs up button to help my channel out. Now let's begin.
It was my first year away from home, and I had rented a small off-campus apartment with two other students, Sarah and Josh. The place was old, creaky, and cheap, perfect for three broke college freshmen. The first week was uneventful. We spent our time unpacking, setting up the place, and getting to know the campus. But by the second week, I started noticing little things that felt off. It began with my keys. I always left them on the hook by the door, but one morning, they were on the kitchen counter instead. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was distracted and left them there without realizing it. Then Sarah mentioned something strange. Her favorite mug, the one she always used for coffee, had disappeared. We searched everywhere for it, but it was gone. We joked that maybe the apartment had a ghost, and then forgot about it. That night, I stayed up late working on a paper. Around 2 a.m., I heard faint creaking sounds coming from above. It sounded like someone walking in the attic. I froze. We didn't have an attic. Or at least we weren't supposed to. There was a small hatch in the hallway ceiling that I assumed led to a crawl space, but none of us had ever opened it. I told myself it was just the old building settling, but the sound didn't stop. Soft, deliberate footsteps moved from one end of the ceiling to the other, then back again. The next morning, I told Sarah and Josh about it. Josh laughed it off, saying it was probably a raccoon or a squirrel. Sarah didn't seem so sure. That evening, Josh decided to prove us wrong. Armed with a flashlight, he pulled a chair under the hatch and pushed it open. The stale smell of dust and mildew hit us as he hoisted himself up into the crawl space. "Nothing up here," he called down. "Just a bunch of insulation and..." He stopped mid-sentence. "What?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "There's a sleeping bag up here," Josh said, his tone uneasy. "And a pizza box?" I felt a chill run down my spine. Josh climbed back down, and we stared at each other, trying to make sense of what he'd found. We decided to call the landlord the next morning. He came by, checked the crawl space, and dismissed it. "Probably just the last tenants leaving junk behind," he said. But none of us were convinced. Over the next few days, the strange incidents escalated. Lights we swore we had turned off were on again. Food went missing from the fridge. I woke up one night to the sound of whispering, so faint I thought I might be dreaming. The final straw came a week later. I came home from class to find the front door unlocked. I was certain I had locked it before leaving. I stepped inside cautiously, calling out for Sarah and Josh. No one answered. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My bedroom door was slightly ajar. I always closed it before leaving. Heart pounding, I pushed the door open. Sitting on my bed, surrounded by my things, was a man. He was gaunt, with sunken cheeks and wild eyes. He wore a tattered hoodie and looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he stood up and bolted past me, out the front door and down the street. We called the police, who searched the attic and found evidence that he had been living there for at least 2 weeks. Empty food wrappers, stolen clothes, and even a journal full of ramblings about watching us. The man was never caught. We moved out of that apartment by the end of the semester, but to this day, I can't sleep without double-checking every lock, every window, and yes, every attic. During my sophomore year at Binghamton University, I discovered a hidden gem in the woods near campus, a small, secluded clearing surrounded by dense trees and vines. It wasn't well known among the student body, which made it the perfect escape. I had been there a few times with different friends, but this one night in early November, it was just me, my roommate Ethan, and our friend Jordan. We decided to head out there after a long week of exams, bringing along a portable speaker, a pack of drinks, and some snacks. The air was crisp, and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze made it feel like fall was in full swing. By the time we reached the clearing, the sun had set, leaving us in the dim glow of our flashlights and the soft light of the moon. We set up a little makeshift seating area using logs that were already there, cracked open a couple of drinks, and started swapping stories. The isolation was refreshing. It felt like we were the only 3 people in the world. As the night wore on, we lost track of time. It was one of those perfect moments where you're just enjoying life. Then, out of nowhere, Ethan froze mid-sentence and tilted his head. "You guys hear that?" he whispered. We all went silent, straining to listen. At first, it was nothing. Just the usual sounds of the woods, leaves shifting, the occasional owl hooting. But then I heard it. A distinct crunch, like a footstep on dried leaves. It wasn't close, but it was deliberate. Jordan tried to brush it off. "Probably a deer or something," he said, taking another sip. Ethan wasn't convinced. "Deer don't usually sound that heavy," he muttered. I was inclined to agree. It didn't feel like an animal. Something about the rhythm of the steps was human. We decided to ignore it, but the vibe had shifted. The music wasn't as loud, and our laughter came out more forced. About 10 minutes later, just as we were starting to relax again, there was a loud crack, a tree branch snapping. This time, it was closer. Too close. We turned off the speaker and shone our flashlights in the direction of the sound. The trees cast eerie shadows, and for a moment, it felt like the darkness itself was alive. "Hello," Ethan called out, his voice wavering slightly. No response. Jordan laughed nervously. "All right, whoever's messing with us, you got us." "Good one." Silence. Then came another sound, a slow, deliberate scraping, like someone dragging something heavy across the ground. My heart was pounding now. Ethan and Jordan exchanged a look, and I could tell they were just as freaked out as I was. "Let's pack up and head back," Ethan said, keeping his voice low. We started gathering our stuff as quickly and quietly as possible. As we were about to leave, something came hurtling out of the darkness and landed with a thud near our feet. A rock, about the size of a fist. "Okay, screw this," Jordan yelled, bolting toward the trail. Ethan and I were right behind him. The path back felt like it went on forever. Every sound, every shadow felt like it was chasing us. At one point, I glanced over my shoulder and swore I saw a figure standing just off the trail, partially obscured by the trees. But I didn't stop to get a better look. We didn't slow down until we reached the edge of campus. Gasping for breath, we turned to look back at the tree line. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, just as we were about to head to the dorms, we saw someone, or something, step out from the shadows. They stood there, perfectly still, watching us. We didn't stick around to see what they wanted. When we got back to the dorm, we locked the door and tried to laugh it off, but none of us could shake the feeling that we weren't alone out there. The next morning, we went back to the clearing to see if we could find any evidence of what, or who, had been out there. The place was untouched. No footprints, no rocks, nothing. We still talk about that night sometimes, but we never went back to the clearing after dark again. Some things are better left a mystery. During my first semester of junior year, I was lucky enough to score a single dorm room. It was tucked away in a corner on the 3rd floor, separated from the main stretch of rooms by a short, narrow hallway. It felt like a perfect little haven, quiet and private but still close enough to friends and the common areas. About a month into the semester, I was up late working on a paper. The room was dead silent except for the occasional creak of the building settling. That's when I heard it, a faint but deliberate knock on my door. It was so soft at first that I thought I imagined it. I paused my music, leaned toward the door, and called out, "Come in." No one entered. Confused, I walked over and opened the door, expecting to see someone, maybe a friend dropping by. No one was there. I peeked around the corner of the hallway, but it was empty. Shrugging it off as someone knocking on the wrong door or pulling a quick prank, I went back to my desk. The next night, the knocking returned. This time it was louder, firm, and rhythmic, like someone who wanted me to open the door. I was lying in bed, half asleep, and the sound jolted me awake. "Who is it?" I called out groggily. The knocking stopped. I hesitated before getting up, debating whether to check or just ignore it. Finally, curiosity won, and I opened the door. Again, the hallway was completely empty. No footsteps, no fading sounds of someone walking away, just eerie silence. I started to feel uneasy, but I told myself it had to be someone playing a joke. The next day, I asked a few people on my floor if they'd been messing with me. They all denied it, looking genuinely confused by my questions. The third night, I was already on edge when I went to bed. I'd barely fallen asleep when a loud banging on my door startled me awake. This wasn't a knock. It was aggressive, like someone trying to break the door down. Adrenaline shot through me as I jumped out of bed. I yelled, "Who the hell is it?" No response. I didn't know whether to open the door this time. After a few seconds of standing there, heart racing, I grabbed a lamp from my desk for protection and swung the door open. Nothing. But then, as I stepped out, I caught a glimpse of movement down the hallway. The figure, tall and hunched, was just disappearing around the corner. Without thinking, I sprinted after them. I turned the corner, but the hallway was empty. Only one door stood ajar, the door to the stairwell. I pushed it open and looked down the staircase. No sounds of footsteps, no creaks from the stairs. Just the faint hum of the building's heating system. At this point, I was thoroughly freaked out. I headed back to my room, locking the door and trying to convince myself it was just some weirdo messing around. The next night was quiet, and I began to think the ordeal was over. But 3 nights later, the knocking returned. This time, it wasn't just on my door. It started faintly, tap 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 on my door. Then, as I sat frozen in bed, I heard it echoing down the hallway, like someone was knocking on every door in rapid succession. I stayed in bed, clutching my blanket like a shield, until the noise stopped. The silence that followed was even worse than the knocking. Finally, I worked up the courage to open my door and step out. The hallway was still. My neighbors' doors were all closed, their lights off. As I stood there, I noticed something on the floor a few feet away, 2 muddy boot prints leading away from my door and stopping in front of the stairwell. That was the last straw. The next morning, I requested a room transfer. I didn't care about how inconvenient it was, I just wanted out of that corner room. To this day, I don't know who or what was knocking on my door, but I know it wasn't just some prank. There was something deeply wrong about those nights, and I'm glad I never had to find out what it was. This happened during my first week at Michigan State University, freshman year. My roommate, Tyler, was all about rushing fraternities. From the moment we moved in, he wouldn't stop talking about which frats he wanted to join and how he was going to climb the social ladder. I wasn't interested in joining a frat, but Tyler was determined to drag me along to rush week parties. The first big party was that Thursday night. Tyler had found some random fraternity off campus. A place he said wasn't top-tiered, but could be a good backup if the better frats didn't work out. I wasn't excited about it, especially since the house was located far off campus in a sketchy neighborhood. We pulled up to this rundown house on a quiet street. If it weren't for the music shaking the walls and the crowd of cars lining the block, we would have assumed it was just another random house. Tyler shrugged, saying, "Looks can be deceiving," and knocked on the door. The guy who answered was sweaty, wearing a stretched-out tank top and holding a red Solo cup. "Come in," he shouted, like he'd known us forever. The living room was packed, at least 40 or 50 guys crammed into a dimly lit space, with maybe 3 girls standing awkwardly by the corner. The air was thick, the floor sticky, and the smell of beer and sweat was overwhelming. I tried to make the best of it, grabbing one of the lukewarm beers they were serving. Tyler was already chatting up some of the guys, leaving me to navigate awkward small talk with whoever was nearby. After about 20 minutes of sweaty conversations and bad music, I was ready to leave. But Tyler wasn't ready yet. "Let's wait a bit," he said. "Leaving now would look bad." I sighed and stayed, nursing another beer and counting down the minutes. That's when this stocky guy with a weird smirk walked up to me. He handed me a tiny bottle of something and said, "This'll get you where you want to go." I laughed nervously and tried to decline, but he insisted. Everyone around me was watching, so I didn't want to seem rude. I downed the drink in one go. It burned more than I expected, but I figured it was just some cheap liquor. The guy didn't leave. Instead, he started asking me random questions, where I was from, what I was studying, and I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. I tried to slip away, but he kept pulling me back into the conversation. Within minutes, I started feeling off. The room felt like it was spinning, and the edges of my vision began to blur. I tried to focus, but everything was getting darker. The last thing I remember was Tyler's voice somewhere in the distance. When I woke up, I was lying on a couch in a dark room. The faint sound of music filtered through the walls, so I knew I was still in the house. My head was pounding, and my body felt heavy. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw I wasn't alone. Across the room, a closet door creaked open just slightly. I heard something shuffle inside. A footstep, maybe? Then the distinct crunch of plastic, like someone stepping on a bag. Panic surged through me. I sat up, feeling dizzy, and stumbled out of the room as fast as I could. When I made it back to the main party, I found Tyler and grabbed his arm. "We're leaving." Now, I barely remember pushing past the crowd at the door or running to the car. On the drive back to campus, I told Tyler what happened. He was shocked. "You were drugged," he said, his voice shaking. He wanted to call the police right then and there, but I wasn't sure what they could do. I didn't feel any pain, my clothes were still intact, and I'd only been unconscious for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Whatever was in that drink didn't work the way they planned, or maybe I woke up too soon. To this day, I still wonder what could have happened if I'd stayed unconscious longer. That night made me realize how quickly things can take a dark turn, even in a setting that's supposed to be fun. It was the last time I let anyone hand me a drink at a party without knowing exactly what was in it.